back, everybody, to the Daily Pigskin Blake, your daily look at fantasy football in the NFL and everything else in between to help make your fantasy football team sizzle. We're going to go with a quick review of the games from yesterday. The Dolphins beating out the Cincinnati Bengals 17-13 on the ground for Miami. Reggie Bush, 19 carries for 48 yards, 1 touchdown. In the air for the Bengals, leading receiver once again, 9 receptions for 65 yards and 1 touchdown was A.J. Green, if you don't know his name. The Colts beat out the Packers in Indianapolis 30-27. Rodgers, really good numbers once again, 21 of 33, that's 63+%, folks, 243 yards in the air and 3 touchdowns. He was also the leading rusher for the Packers, 5 carries for 57 yards. Randall Cobb, somebody that we mentioned before this week, leading through to this game, 4 receptions for 82 yards and 1 touchdown. Luck wasn't lucky, he just was actually good, 31 of 55 for 362 and 2 touchdowns. Leading receiver for Indianapolis with a big game, Reggie Wayne, 13 receptions for 212 and 1 touchdown. It wasn't a scoring affair in Kansas City as the Kansas City Chiefs hosted the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens winning 9-6. Ravens now 4-1 on the season. However, on the ground was where you got your fantasy points. Ray Rice, 17 carries for 102 on the other side of the ball. For Kansas City, Jamal Charles, 30 carries for 140. Week in and week out, Jamal Charles will get you yardage. The Cleveland Browns look to come into New York hoping for a win against the Giants and just not getting the job done. 41-27 as the Giants have a blowout second quarter. The Browns now 0-5 on the year. Whedon, 291 in the air with 2 touchdowns. Richardson on the ground, 81 yards, plus a handful of receiving yardage. On the ground, though, 1 touchdown for Richardson as well. Josh Gordon was the leading receiver for the Browns, 2 receptions, 82 yards, and 2 touchdowns. On the other side of the ball, Eli Manning, 25 of 37 for 259 and 3 touchdowns. Bradshaw, a big game on the ground, 30 carries for 200 yards and 1 touchdown. Philadelphia Eagles cannot stop the Steelers, 14-16, final score there. Vic, 175 in the air, 2 touchdowns, throwing. Mendenhall on the other side of the ball for Pittsburgh, a welcome back game. Finishes the game, 14 carries, 81 yards, and 1 touchdown. The Falcons stay loose and beat out the Washington Redskins, who surged midway through the game, 24-17. The Falcons now 5-0 on the year. The Redskins 2-3, and they are 0-2 at home. Matty Ice, 34 for 52, 345, and 2 touchdowns. Turner on the ground, 18 carries, 67 yards, and 1 touchdown. And Tony Gonzalez knows how to count, 13 receptions, for 123 yards and 1 touchdown. Kirk Cousins coming in for RG3, 5 of 9, 111 yards passing and 1 touchdown. On the ground, Alfred Morris keeps getting the yardage, 115 yards on the ground for him. Santonio Moss, the leading receiver for Washington, 2 receptions for 80 yards and 1 touchdown. The Seattle Seahawks come into Carolina and get the job done, 16-12 against a pretty now becoming piss-poor Carolina Panthers offense. Wilson, he's not worth a pickup for Seattle, 221 yards and 1 touchdown. Lynch on the ground, the leading rusher, 21 carries for 85 yards. For Carolina, Newton, it was the Newton show. Newton passing 141 yards, no touchdowns, no anything happening there. He was only 12 for 29 on the ground, 7 carries for 42 yards. Brandon LaFell, a name that we've said, a name that we will continue to say, 3 receptions for 44 yards, the leading receiver for Carolina. The Bears are now 4-1, led by the Devil, as they beat out Jacksonville Jaguars 41-3. Cutler, 23 of 39 on the day for 292 and 2 touchdowns. Forte gets 107 yards on the ground. And Brandon Marshall, another great receiving game, 12 receptions for 144 and 1 touchdown. Gabbert can't get it done, only 142 in the air. MJD can't get it done, even though he almost had a 5 yards per carry average. 12 carries for 56 yards, and Cecil Shorts, a name that's been mentioned this week leading up to this game, 2 receptions for 43 yards. Keep your eye on him, and in the previous game, keep your eye on LaFell. If they're both there, it'd probably be a good idea to snatch them up. The Tennessee Titans are becoming the worst team offensively and defensively to perform in the NFL right now. Yes, you might have a team like Jacksonville, you might have a team like Carolina, you might even have a team like the Brownies, who are 0-5. But as far as points production, points against, Tennessee is just horrid. Minnesota found that out this weekend. The Vikings now 4-1 on the season, 3-0 at home, beating out the Titans 30-7. Hasselbeck, 26 of 43, 200 yards, 1 touchdown. Chris Johnson, only 24 yards off of 15 carries. And Wright, a name that's been tossed around a little bit, just like Britt, just like everybody else that's on Tennessee that could be getting the ball every week, playing in that Russian roulette kind of an offense. 9 receptions for 66 yards for Kendall Wright. On the other side of the ball, Christian Ponder, a name mentioned a couple weeks back, a name that's still being mentioned as he's becoming more and more of a fantasy pickup off the waiver wire right now. I believe that he's owned in over 75% of the leagues, 80% of the public leagues, somewhere around there. 25 of 35, about 70% passing on the day, 258 yards, 2 touchdowns. AP on the ground, 17 carries, 88 yards. And in the air, Percy Harvin, the leading receiver for the Minnesota Vikings, 8 receptions for 108 and 1 touchdown. Peyton Manning's Broncos come into New England hoping to beat out Tom Brady's Patriots and just cannot get the job done. 31-21 the final score as the Patriots go to 3-2 on the season. The Broncos now 0-2 in away games. Peyton Manning, 31 of 44, 345, and 3 touchdowns. Great fantasy numbers. Willis McGahee, though, on the ground, the opposite. 14 carries for only 51 yards. Demaryius Thomas, the leading receiver for the Denver Broncos, 9 receptions for 188, no touchdowns. Brady, not the best day, 223 yards and 1 touchdown in the air. However, Stephen Ridley on the ground, 28 carries for 151 and 1 touchdown. And Welker, 13 receptions for 104 and 1 touchdown. The Buffalo Bills come into San Francisco hoping for a win as their season keeps getting worse and worse. They just can't get it. The 49ers beating them out 45-3, the final score. The 49ers now 4-1 on the season, 2-0 at home. Fitzpatrick, only 126 yards in the air on the day. Leading receiver, Scott Chandler, who's been a pretty decent receiver for Buffalo this year, 4 receptions for 40 yards. On the other side of the ball, Alex Smith, 18 of 24, that's 75% completion rating for those counting at home, 303 and 3 touchdowns. On the ground, Frank Gore, 14 carries for 106 and 1 touchdown. And Michael Crabtree, the leading receiver for the 49ers, 6 receptions for 113 and 1 touchdown. In last night's action, the New Orleans Saints were hoping for a win to not finish this week at 0-5 on the season, and they actually got the job done. 31-24 final score as they host the San Diego Chargers. For San Diego, Phillip Rivers goes 27 for 42 on the day, 354 yards, 2 touchdowns. Matthews on the ground, 12 carries, 80 yards, and 1 touchdown. And Malcolm Floyd gets it done, 5 receptions for 108, no touchdowns in the air. Still the leading receiver for the Chargers. On the other side of the ball, Breeze, with the win, without the win, he's always good for points week in and week out. 29 for 45, 370 yards passing, and 4 touchdowns. P.T. Cruiser, only 9 carries for only 30 yards. Tough game. Marcus Colston, 9 receptions for 131 and 3 touchdowns. A big game for him and for those scoring at home. Between 31 and we'll say about 40 for standard scoring, depending on the way that your touchdowns work, depending on the way that your receptions work. It's a huge game. That's it for me for my look at yesterday's action. I'm not going to preview too much about tonight's action as the Texans at 4-0 come into the Jets, because there's nothing really to speak of as far as who do you play, who do you not play. You stick with Schwab, you stick with Foster. If you have that spot open and you need it, you go with Tate. As far as, aerial targets, Andre Johnson, Owen Daniels are always good for Houston. You might see some play out of Walters, depending on how out of control this game gets. For the Jets, you don't want to play anybody that's in the starting rotation right now. Sanchez is still a mystery. Tebow is not worth the start. Sean Green is losing his job slowly but surely to Bilal Powell. And as far as home status, there is none for him. So the whole way around the board, the Jets you don't play. Houston, you go with 110%. You can check out this broadcast as well as every other broadcast of the Pigskin Blink at fantasyfootballtoolkit.com as well as 360sportsnetwork.com. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, if you have any sits or starts questions, if you have any quandaries about who you should pick up off the bench to fill in for your team to get the most out of those bye weeks or even to play the most out of those matchups, or if somebody's getting really hot and you're still unsure and you want to pick them up before somebody else gets the scoop, you can send over those comments and questions to Las Cause at fantasyfootballtoolkit.com. That's it for me. Enjoy tonight's action, it should be a blowout, and it should be pretty uninspiring. Later.